The house was unnervingly quiet the morning he left. My husband's suitcase rolling across the tiles, the front door closing with its flat click, the silence after. It wasn't the absence of noise that unsettled me, it was the absence of weight. I had expected the house to sag with loneliness, but instead it felt lighter, as though something had been quietly removed, leaving behind a hollow where sound should have been. For a while, I carried on in ritual, wiping the counters, folding the blanket over the couch, rinsing the empty coffee cup he'd left behind. Small, automatic gestures, nothing to anchor me except their repetition. My movements were too clean, too precise. It was as if I were keeping house for a stranger. The stepson arrived without much warning, a message that he was coming, and then there he was, standing in the doorway with his bag slung over one shoulder, his presence filling the air in a way my husband's never quite did. I caught myself shifting my posture as he crossed the threshold, some buried instinct straightening my spine, sharpening the edges of me that had dulled. His gaze met mine in a way that felt unfamiliar, not deferent, not careless, simply direct. I noticed things I shouldn't have. The way his voice lingered after he spoke, the faint scent of cologne still clinging to his shirt, the looseness of his movements that suggested both youth and confidence. He was not intrusive, not even forward, but his presence seemed to wake a part of me I had long stopped consulting. That night, I lay in bed and the silence pressed heavier. The steady hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the creak of old wood cooling, the faint sound of water pipes adjusting in the walls, each sound underlined the truth. I was aware of another body in the house, and it unsettled me not because of fear, but because of what it stirred. Nothing had happened, not really. He had carried his bag upstairs, set it down, unpacked with the ease of someone accustomed to passing through. He had asked me nothing, expected nothing. But I found myself listening for his steps, waiting for his door to shut, feeling the air shift with each movement. It was proximity, that simple. The reminder of another presence in the space I had grown accustomed to inhabiting alone. Yet that nearness bloomed into something I had not felt in years, an awareness of myself, of my body, of the way I moved through rooms. It was not attraction, not yet. It was the stirring of something I thought I had buried, something my marriage had dulled. The early days settled into a rhythm, though it wasn't the kind I had known with my husband. With him, silence meant distance, a gulf neither of us crossed. With the stepson, silence felt occupied, alive, like a current humming beneath the skin. We moved around one another with careful civility. I cooked breakfast, folded laundry, filled the house with the ordinary motions of routine. He joined in, sometimes wordless, sometimes offering small gestures of help that seemed more intimate than they should have been, reaching past me for a plate, holding the fridge door while I bent to pick something up, leaning just close enough that I felt the heat of him without the weight of a touch. It should have been nothing. Two people sharing a house. Yet his eyes lingered a fraction too long, and when I looked back, I did not look away quickly enough. The pauses in conversation held something more than words. I caught myself studying the way light cut across his face in the mornings, how his posture softened when he thought no one was watching. The first crack in restraint was small, almost laughable in its insignificance. I had reached for a glass too quickly, nearly tipping it. His hand closed gently around my elbow, steadying me. It lasted no longer than a second, but the pressure of his touch sank deep, deliberate though it wasn't meant to be. The moment ended as abruptly as it came, but my body remembered it. That night I lay awake, restless. My skin felt too alive, as though brushed by invisible fingertips. I could still feel the imprint of his hand, though it had been nothing more than a reflexive steadiness. I turned beneath the sheets, shifting from one side to the other, but the weight of the silence would not let me rest. I told myself it was absurd. A glance, a touch, a silence. I was building stories out of nothing, but the body betrays what the mind denies. When I passed him in the hallway, my breath altered. When I heard the sound of his footsteps on the stairs, I felt a prickle of anticipation. The house had grown charged. Each room held the residue of something unspoken, thickening with every shared moment. Nothing explicit had passed between us. No words, no admissions. But my nights no longer belonged to sleep. They belonged to the memory of glances that stretched too long, and silences that felt like confessions neither of us dared voice. The kiss lingered long after it ended, not on my lips but beneath my skin. It was not guilt that burned through me. It was vitality. I had not felt that pulse in years, that sudden rush of blood that reminded me I was still a woman, still alive inside a body that had grown accustomed to absence. The boundary, invisible until it broke, had been crossed. And with it came a new defiance, subtle but certain. I began to dress differently, and this time I knew why. I told myself it was for me. The navy slip that clung where cotton once sagged, the blouse left just a little unbuttoned, the perfume I hadn't worn in years. When I walked through the house, I caught myself lingering in doorways, letting him notice. His gaze was not intrusive, not crude. It was attentive. To be seen, truly seen, was intoxicating after years of being invisible. Our conversations grew sharper, daring. We skirted topics that hovered close to the truth without naming it, about what it means to be perfect, about how perfection often erases, about the hunger to be visible, to be desired. Each word bent toward revelation. Each silence pressed heavier, daring us further. Leaving the house together carried its own thrill. A walk down the block where eyes might see us side by side. A visit to the antique shop where I traced my fingers along objects older than us both, as though touching something forbidden could excuse what was building between us. These outings were small escapes, a testing of ground beyond our walls. The motel came like gravity, inevitable once the line had been touched. Its plain facade offered nothing romantic, no pretense of love. It was anonymity, a door that could be locked against the world. Inside, desire shed its restraint. His hands no longer hovered. They claimed, and my body answered with a ferocity I thought long dead. The sheets smelled of bleach. The lamp's light was harsh, but none of it mattered. What mattered was the undeniability of flesh meeting flesh, the collapse of silence into touch. I did not think of my husband, not once. I thought only of the heat against my skin, the reminder that I had not disappeared, that I still existed beyond the narrow roles I had been bound to. When it was over, I lay there not in shame but in clarity. This was not destruction. It was awakening. And yet, as we drove back, the weight returned. The invisible lines had been crossed, burned away, leaving only the question of how far we could walk before the fire consumed everything. Desire has a way of attaching itself to the smallest things. A cup of coffee, steam curling between us, suddenly felt intimate, a ritual we shared without needing to name it. The errands that once felt like drudgery, running to the store, stopping at the post office, became moments I anticipated, as though the world outside our walls allowed us to breathe closer, freer. Even music in the car shifted, lyrics I had heard 100 times taking on new weight. Notes hanging between us like promises. I began to dress differently. At first, subtle changes, choosing the silk robe I had nearly forgotten, slipping into blouses that fit closer, softer against my skin. Then, without conscious decision, lingerie that had been buried in drawers resurfaced. Not worn for him. Not yet for me. But existing as a reminder that I was still a body, still alive. Each choice whispered of an awakening I could not deny. Ordinary contact became accelerant. In the grocery aisle, his hand brushed mine as we both reached for something, and the simple touch sent heat through me sharper than any deliberate caress. We laughed about exhaustion after a long day, but beneath the laughter was an undercurrent, an acknowledgement that neither of us could disguise. In the quiet of the car, headlights streaking across the windshield, I felt the tension of words unsaid filling the air heavier than silence itself. The kiss did not arrive as shock. It was inevitable, The answer to a question that had been written into every lingering look, every suspended silence. His lips on mine were restrained, reverent, as though both of us feared the collapse that might follow. It was not hunger. Not yet. It was recognition. A quiet acknowledgement that the line had been crossed and there was no retreating from it. When it ended, the world was unchanged. The car still humming, the night still pressing close. But inside me, everything tilted. My breath caught in the aftermath, not from guilt, but from the unbearable truth of what I had been craving without admitting it. The kiss was brief, but it carried the weight of all that had been held back, all that had been waiting in shadows. It answered the silence, gave shape to the glances, made tangible the invisible. It was not a question anymore. It was the beginning of something neither of us could undo. The phone calls with my husband became theater. He spoke his lines dutifully, his voice softened with routine affection. I miss you. I can't wait to be home. I answered with the words I knew were expected, the same lines I had rehearsed for years, but they came out flat, drained of warmth. I know, I would say, as though acknowledging a fact rather than returning a feeling. It was easier that way. When he finally returned, suitcase rolling across the same tiles, the sound carried none of the disruption it once did. He held flowers, a bottle of wine, a smile rehearsed for reunion. I accepted them with a hollow kind of politeness, a gesture of gratitude without pulse. His kiss on my cheek left no mark. His touch on my waist felt mechanical, like a hand guided by habit rather than desire. I studied him the way I used to study mirrors, searching for signs, for life, for anything to tether myself back to him. But there was nothing. My body had gone still to him, unresponsive. I could not conjure heat where there was none, could not force a spark into ash. That night, he reached for me in bed. His hands moved with the same sequence of familiarity, a pattern that had once been enough to soothe me into surrender. But I felt only distance, a body touching mine without entering me, without seeing me. My skin recoiled not from disgust, but from emptiness. I lay still, allowing him to move as though enacting a role, and when it ended, I turned my face toward the wall, eyes open in the dark. The gulf between us widened in those hours of night. His breathing slowed into sleep beside me while I stared at the faint strip of light under the stepson's door across the hall. That glow became a beacon, a quiet reminder of what pulsed beyond reach. I listened for the faint sounds of his movement, his wakefulness, knowing he too was not at rest. The marriage fractured not with screams, not with betrayal uncovered in sudden violence, but with silence, the kind that suffocates. The rituals of husband and wife remained intact. Meals shared, schedules followed, but the marrow was gone. He returned with his gifts, his practiced love, his steady touch. But I was already elsewhere. My body had remembered what it was to be alive, and it no longer responded to him. Nights grew colder. I lay awake, not waiting for his hand to find me, but for the weight of the silence to lift, for the light under the other door to stay on just a little longer. The ritual of dressing became my quiet rebellion. I would slip into boutiques I once hurried past, letting fabric whisper across my skin, watching myself in mirrors that reflected not the wife, not the stepmother, but the woman I had misplaced. Navy silk clung to me like a second skin, shimmering against the dull palette of my old clothes. Standing there, turning slowly under the lights, I felt as though I were meeting my body again for the first time. For so long, I had dressed to satisfy someone else's gaze. My husband's preferences had dictated the muted shades, the conservative hems. Even the rare lingerie I once bought had been worn as performance, not possession. But now, when I chose a blouse cut to reveal or lingerie stitched delicate against my body, it was not for him. Not even for the stepson. It was for me. For the electric rush that came when I looked in the mirror and recognized myself again. Our conversations deepened in tandem with these private rituals. He and I circled truths in words neither of us had spoken aloud before. How empty it feels to live unseen. how unbearable it is to inhabit a role rather than a life. We admitted, without confessing directly, that our nearness was more than accident, that our pulse belonged to the same rhythm. We did not touch, not always, but the silence between us carried weight equal to any embrace. There were moments that ended unresolved. His hand paused near mine, retreating. My lips parted with words that dissolved before sound. We practiced restraint, though it was not born of morality. It was survival, a desperate attempt to keep the fragile world from cracking too soon. But each unfinished gesture lodged in me like a stone, heavy with what it withheld. I began leaving the house for space, slipping away to places that required no roles, motels with their anonymous bedding, lookout points where the horizon swallowed my thoughts whole. I sat in those spaces alone, testing whether the new version of myself existed outside of him, or if she was only a reflection of his gaze. The truth frightened me. She was both. He had woken her, yes, but she was mine now to claim. Standing at a motel window, I watched the neon flicker, casting my reflection against the glass. I did not look away. For the first time in years, I recognized the woman looking back. The end did not arrive with confession or discovery. It came with a drive to the sea, a meeting not planned but inevitable. The beach stretched before us, wind tearing at the edges of our clothes, waves collapsing and rising again in their endless rhythm. We walked until the sand grew damp, until the only company we had was the horizon itself. We did not touch. That was the strangest part. How absence could feel heavier than presence. His nearness carried the weight of everything that had happened, everything withheld. We sat on the cool sand, not side by side, not apart, but in a fragile balance, as though even the air between us knew the truth. I admitted what had been circling in me for weeks, that my life had not been ruined by him. It had been given back. He had not stolen, had not broken, but revealed what was already cracked. For so long I had existed in silence, reduced to duty and routine, my body dulled to absence. He had made me feel visible again, even in the smallest glance, even in the simplest touch. That was his gift, and my burden. He did not answer in words, but I felt his agreement in the stillness between us. We both knew we could not return. The version of me who accepted invisibility was gone, and the version of him who pretended indifference no longer existed. Whatever paths lay before us, they began here, at the edge of the sea, suspended in the knowledge that we had crossed into lives we had not imagined. The horizon shimmered, a line of possibility rather than distance. We sat there watching it, as though by staring long enough we might glimpse what waited beyond. I did not reach for his hand. He did not lean into me. It was not restraint but recognition. Some truths are heavier than flesh. Some choices too sharp to soften with touch. The tide crept closer, washing away footprints, erasing evidence of where we had been. But the erasure was only surface. Beneath, the mark had been made. Whatever we became, together or apart, the truth was irreversible. We rose as the sky dimmed, our steps slow, deliberate, carrying the weight of a future neither of us could name. I felt no shame, no regret, only clarity. He had not undone me. He had revealed me. And as the sea darkened under the fading light, I understood. We were no longer waiting for our lives to begin. They had already shifted, already broken open. The horizon was not escape. It was the beginning.